The trial of Sean Combs, also known as Diddy or Puff Daddy, began earlier this month, and the coverage has been extensive. Among other crimes, he's accused of sex trafficking and racketeering conspiracy. Combs' ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, is a key piece of this case because of the abuse she personally experienced at the hands of Combs. Now, it's really been widely circulated, so it's highly likely that you've seen the footage of Combs physically assaulting Ventura in a hotel hallway. It's really triggering, so if you haven't seen it, I would not recommend watching it. But according to other testimonies throughout the case, this type of abuse happened very regularly. Cassie even says that Combs forced her to have group sex and then filmed it as a means of controlling her actions and behaviors. Basically, as a threat, if she does something he doesn't like, he's going to use this video he has against her. Now, despite the really serious descriptions of abuse and terror that Cassie Ventura faced throughout her decade-long relationship with Combs, there's been this uprising of voices on the internet, of course, insisting that anyone actually being abused would leave their relationship. They're saying that Cassie is milking the spotlight and the lifestyle that Combs provided her, which honestly is what exactly? Terror? She said in an Instagram caption when this was all kind of coming out that domestic violence is the issue. It broke me down to someone I never thought I would become. With a lot of hard work, I am better today, but I will always be recovering from my past. That is what domestic violence does. It is designed to target your insecurities and to make you feel like you can't live without the person causing harm. So when a victim discloses the abuse they're experiencing to friends or family, and then they're asked, why don't you just leave? Those friends and family are placing the blame on the person experiencing abuse. It makes them feel like they are at fault because there is some action that they are not taking. Like Cassie Ventura, who faced physical assaults, financial control, and the fear of losing everything. All elements of abuse make it incredibly difficult to leave. In light of this trial, we thought it was imperative to release an episode that we did really early on in the podcast about why don't victims just leave? This is a dangerous question to ask because it assumes people who leave abusive relationships are automatically safer. Please, if you want to know how to express concern for someone experiencing abuse and to truly understand the barriers to leaving, please keep listening. Check the show notes for more resources. And above anything else, stop asking victims why they won't just leave and start asking people who use abuse why they keep abusing. This is Unsilenced, a JBWS podcast where we have real conversations about abuse. I'm MC Robinson, and today we're speaking with
Robin Hughes, and I am the Crisis Response Team Manager for JBWS.
Robin is going to explain why leaving an abusive relationship isn't as easy as it may seem. When someone discloses to another person that they're experiencing abuse, I think that there is this natural inclination to want to solve it. I think the person might say, "Okay, like I have a solution for you. Maybe you never thought of this. Why don't you just leave? You know, you're unhappy, you're unsafe. Why don't you just leave it all behind you?" And while I think we can understand that line of thinking, why isn't it that easy to just leave an abusive relationship?
That's very interesting that you say that because I do hear that a lot.
Mhm.
And if I asked anybody to get up and leave their life, the life they know, the life they're accustomed to, would they struggle with that decision? There are so many reasons people stay in unhealthy relationships. And what's interesting too is there is a part of that person that they love,
Yeah.
that regardless of the abuse, this is something that happened to them. And I always use this analogy. If I said to you, don't go on this highway in the morning because there's going to be a major accident, you're going to be delayed for hours, you will do everything possible to avoid that road.
Hmm.
But someone got on that road and a major accident happened there.
Yep.
And now they're trapped there.
Mhm.
But had they known, they would have totally diverted that area, right? Or
Mhm.
diverted that experience in their lives.
You make a really good point about somebody just having to pack up their entire life and leave. Like, what one of us wouldn't have terrible anxiety, even if we weren't in an abusive relationship, to do that? Even asking that question, why don't you just leave, is problematic and could maybe have a person that's experiencing abuse make them feel a sense of shame. And why is that an issue?
Oh, there is such shame around uh, someone who's in an unhealthy relationship. If they've been told repeatedly that the behavior that they're being presented with is a result of their behavior, they believe that. They
Mhm.
believe that they somehow had control over that situation or that person's behavior, which is not truth. But you believe it. If you're told something over and over and over again, you believe it. Also, it's a hidden secret if someone is in an unhealthy relationship for the most part. So families don't know. Their church members or friends don't know. Their regular friends don't know. And there's a sense of embarrassment of how did I get here? How
Mhm.
did this happen to me?
Mhm.
And will anybody believe me? Because they see that person very differently in the world,
Oh, yeah.
right? So
Hmm.
how they present themselves in the world to other people, and if someone comes out and says, but that's not the person I know, that's not the person I live with, there's a sense of disbelief by
Hmm.
other people of what that person is experiencing. And there's a lot of guilt and shame around that, a lot of self-blame, as if they could have done something differently. And in reality, when someone stays in an unhealthy relationship, they're guilty of having hope.
Yeah.
Hope that if they keep trying, that relationship will improve and it will get better. That's the crime here, right? Just having hope that if they keep trying, it will get better.
What you said about love is a important piece of this that I think it boils down to a lack of understanding about what domestic violence and abuse is, that we forget that these people got into relationships with these partners of theirs because they loved them. And how hard is it to then realize that you're being hurt by the person that you love and that says claims to love you as well? How do you
Right,
even begin to deal with that and then figure out, but will it get better? They were so different in the beginning. And I think that also really complicates the leaving process.
right. And it's not always bad, right? A relationship couldn't maintain bad 24/7. So there's an ebb and flow to this, right? So there's a
Right.
cycle to this. So there's sometimes things are fine, they're great, and you're in a sense of security and a false security that, look, things have gotten better. And then they build and build and build, and they may wind up back in that place. But then again, they get over that hump and then they go back into that sense of security. So there's a pattern to this that is habitual. And when you have those good moments, someone just is so thankful for them and relishes in them and holds on to them
Hmm.
as the reminder when things get really bad, it's going to get okay again,
Yeah.
right? And it becomes a scale, right? When the bad outweighs the good is when a decision has to be made in their minds of, how do I get out safely? How do I move forward without this person in my life? And that's a tough spot to be in for anybody.
Yeah, and I think that that is a really important piece of this as well. Someone once said to me something like, your relationship should be 80% good and 20% difficult, not 80% difficult and 20% good, because it is so easy to hold on to those nuggets of, but they're, see, they could be better. See, like they're definitely good. And do you think that that plays into why people, once they leave, were acting like, oh, once you've left the abusive relationship, it's behind you. But so many people go back. And do you think that this plays into that? Why do they go back, even if they have left them, let's say, three, four times?
Well, we know statistically it takes 7 times for someone to even reach out for help. So that means they've had experienced horrible things in that home and then finally did something. If someone does decide to leave, there's a lot of other moving parts to them leaving. trying to sustain themselves, trying to be independent when they have no resources, um, trying to take care of their kids alone, dealing with the legal system, right? If there's a restraining order, if they're going through a divorce, it is very, very hard to navigate those systems. And sometimes it just becomes easier to just go back. It
Hmm.
becomes the path of least resistance to go back, even though it's horrible, even though it's the devil they know.
Yeah.
That I will say, it's they know that behavior, they know that pattern, and there's a sense of comfort, even though it's wrong and unhealthy for that person. They know it, and there's a familiarity to it that when you're dealing with systems like divorce systems, the court systems, the police,
Mhm.
that's even more scary sometimes for people than staying, you
It's
know?
almost this false sense of security because you know how it goes. Even if it is unpredictable, it's predictably unpredictable in a lot of
Correct.
ways. And that I think is something that you can kind of bizarrely not take comfort in, but just you know it's going to happen, as you said, rather than facing these obstacles that you don't know. And you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but what does make it so difficult? What are those systems that maybe complicate somebody's ability to leave?
What about someone just who has a bad experience with the police?
Hmm.
Um, or their family members have had a bad experience with the police. They're afraid to call. They're
Yes.
afraid to tell. They're
Hmm.
afraid they won't be believed or they will be treated unkindly. Or
Yes.
it brings in other entities like immigration or DCPMP that they're not prepared to deal with, and they think they've done something wrong.
Mhm.
So it definitely becomes more frightening in that moment. What's interesting about it is, say I'm sitting with someone in a police station. That moment is critical because something traumatic has happened to them that has tipped them into they were thrust into a system that they weren't prepared for, whether it's with the police calling for a restraining order, all of that happens.
Mhm.
But if we don't have the resources to help them in that moment, that gives the opportunity for vacillation. If we don't have a place to put someone and their children immediately,
Mhm.
that opens an opportunity to say, well, you know what, it's too much. I'm just going to go back. It's easier to go back,
Yeah.
right? And it is easier to go back. It
Mhm.
is easier to go back than to fight through that feeling and move forward to safety.
Mhm.
And that's a weird statement to make
Mhm.
because they know they're not safe and they know their children aren't safe. But that prospect of moving forward is so debilitatingly frightening
Mhm.
that going back seems like the only option.
Yeah. This is something that I actually wrote down to talk to you about because in preparing for this episode, I was thinking, man, we're talking about how challenging it is to leave, how difficult it is to leave. And then I thought, what if somebody is listening to this and they're thinking, oh my gosh, I can't leave now. It seems so overwhelming. What would you say to them to kind of combat that? Or what would you say to them just in response to that?
Well, I have to say, because this is what I do for a living, there are options out there. And I think sometimes people who are in these situations don't even realize that there's options,
Mhm.
right? That's the first thing. They may not even know. I mean, they may not even know that there's shelters or there's services out there to give them momentum to move forward and be safe. And then to trust that there are people out there that believe them, that will validate them, that will hear them. Maybe for the first time in their life, they'll sit with somebody who says, yeah, I get it. Like, this is a tough spot for you, but not to make decisions for them, but to give, because honestly, they may have never made a decision for themselves ever.
Mhm.
Ever. They are told what to do. Abusive relationships are about power and control. So this
Mhm.
person hasn't had no say
Mhm.
before about their lives. So now we're all giving them an opportunity to make choices that are in their best interest. And sometimes they're confused by that, just the
Yeah.
thought of making a decision for themselves.
Mhm.
So for to be able to give them opportunity to make choices and choices based on safety and choices based on resources, that's what this is about. It's connecting with them, believing them, and being able to give them options that they may never even have thought of before.
So empowering. The first time you said that to me, I was so mind blown by the empowerment that it could bring. But it also brings me to another question, which is what would you say to people who maybe they're seeing their loved one in this really abusive, unhealthy relationship and they're like pressuring them to leave? Like, you have to go. This isn't good for you. This isn't good for your family. Or they're taking a hard line and they're like, I'm not talking to you until you decide to do what's good for you and leave your partner. How do you respond to that? Or what would you say to those people? How are they affecting somebody that's experiencing domestic violence by having these kind of hard lines?
Well, it's interesting. We could have two different types of hard lines in this, right? We can have somebody who feels that that is the role of their partner, like that's their position in life, and they should do nothing, right?
Mhm.
They're supporting that abuse behind the scenes by saying nothing.
Mhm.
Then you have someone who feels that they're have that person's best interest and they want to, of course they want to fix it. Of course they want to step in and save them, right? Pull up
Mhm.
in a van with a ski mask and say, I'm going to help you change your
Yeah.
life, right? That is would be wonderful if you could do that. But really what it's about is respecting that person enough to point out what you see,
Mhm.
that I have concerns. I'm worried. I'm worried about you. And I want you to know that I'm a safe person that you can come to and talk, not direct, not tell them what to do. They already have someone telling them what to do,
Mhm.
right? So then you become no different than that other person telling them what to do. But to be able to support them and say, I am here for you. I'm worried. I'm scared. These are the things I'm seeing that
Mhm.
scare me. When someone's in an unhealthy relationship, those incidents that are unhealthy are like pieces of a puzzle scattered on the floor. And they think nobody sees them. And they don't even see them because they're just all over the carpet. And you can't see a picture when there's just pieces everywhere.
Right.
So out of concern, if someone came and says, listen, I saw this and I saw this and this happened, and they're pulling those pieces together to form a picture that a person can relate to and say, wow, you're right. That is my life. That is my relationship.
Mhm.
And to be able to say, hey, I know that this number, there's somebody you can talk to who could help, or I'm always here for you, no matter what, day or night. If you need me, I'm here for you, and kind of let them take the lead in it, but show the concern and the support in that way.
Yeah.
They will run if you start telling them what to do because they're not thinking you see all the reasons what's keeping them there.
Hmm. Yeah. And what I remember the first time we had this conversation about that, and I thought it was such a good metaphor for how people struggle to see it as a completed picture. And I think if we talk a little bit about the power of being that safe person for somebody that's experiencing abuse, what would you say to somebody that maybe has a more pessimistic view and they're like, they've been going through this for 2 years? I feel like by allowing them to talk about it and not taking a hard line, I'm enabling the behavior. What would you say in response to that? Because I think that's also a big thing that comes up with people they're fed up. They don't want to hear it anymore. They think that they're complicit. And why is that complicated?
It is complicated because if they don't have you to go to, what do they have?
Hmm.
Right? If you give up on being that support person and walk away, and I'm not saying there aren't times when you do have to walk away for your own boundaries and your own mental health
Hmm.
and how painful that is to witness. And that's a conversation too.
Yeah.
That's a conversation that can be made with love.
Mhm.
I know you're not ready to do anything, and I know you're in a difficult situation. But for me, I need to back up a little bit because it's affecting me, right? But I love you. I love
Mhm.
you and I care about you, but this is affecting me.
Mhm.
Um, and let that person know because you're still saying I care. You
Yeah.
just think I have to put a boundary. But it's a tough spot to be in, but it's equally tough for that person who's experiencing abuse. They want to leave.
Mhm.
Nobody wants to be treated unkindly. I mean, I don't know anybody in this world who would walk head on to want to have that in their lives, you know? But breaking out of that cycle and that pattern and being self-sufficient is very difficult. And I think family members specifically, or good friends hearing it all the time over and over and over again, to be there when they're ready, right? When they're ready and they say, you know what, I can't do this anymore. What should I do? for you to be educated enough to know where to direct them,
Mm.
right? That is a huge part. And even all through the course of them coming to you saying, you know what, there's an agency to this, there's an agency in our county. I know that they do work like this. This is a number you can call and just talk to them and get a plan in place, right? You don't have to make a choice right now. You don't have to do anything right now, but
Mhm.
to actually get a plan in place of how you want to move forward
Mhm.
and be able to connect them to those services to do that.
Because I think a lot of people feel almost hopeless, like, oh, I can't do anything to help him, her, them,
Mhm.
whatever. I can't step in. This is beyond me. And I think, what would you say to somebody that really doesn't know where to start on how to support somebody that's experiencing abuse? What would you recommend is like the first thing that they do?
Well, you know what they say, education is key, right? It's you need to seek out that agency to
Mhm.
say, how do I support this person? This is what's going on. And let the people who are educated in this field step in and help you and guide you through that connection, right?
Mhm.
And then you'll know firsthand. I always believe it's better to have a soft handoff, right? If someone comes to you and says, you know what, I made a phone call and this is what I was told, and they were so kind and they really understood, and I spoke to Maria and she was great, and she's somebody you can talk to, that is more welcoming and inviting and supportive than saying, hey, here's a helpline number you can call, or here's
Right.
you've done the work, which also speaks volumes to the person that you cared enough to do the work
Yeah.
to find out information that might help them, right? Instead of just shooting off ideas of what worked or what you think would work, right? Um, because I see sometimes I have family members who have also been in abusive relationships. And because they've been in that place, they think their solution is the right solution,
Right.
right? And that's not true, because everybody's situation is so unique to them, and what the barriers to leaving are different for everybody.
Mhm.
And to be cognizant of what worked for that person is not the end all be all and the right path for that other person. It's about self-awareness too, and knowing boundaries within that relationship too, you know
And I think that's so hard because kind of similar to what we said at the beginning, people want to solve it. They're like, "Oh, you're hurting. I care about you. I'm going to solve it. Either leave the partner or this is what I did and you should follow me." And I
Right.
think it's a very human thing to care about people and want to help them, but it can be misguided and it can come out in really difficult ways, especially if they're not aware of these complicating factors.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back to that a little bit, but you mentioned there's some factors that make it really challenging to leave. They might not have finances of their own, housing and food insecurity. Can you go into a little bit more about those kind of factors that could make it very difficult for a person to leave if they've been experiencing abuse?
For example, right now we have a housing crisis. Everybody knows there's a housing crisis. With inflation, even if you find a place, how do you pay for that place,
Yeah.
right? Um, so if I have somebody in a police station who comes to me and they're ready to leave, they're ready to move forward, but their kids are in a school district here, and the only place I can place them is in another county, and they don't have a car, right? Now I'm asking them to take their children out of school. I'm
Mhm.
asking them to move. What if they have a job right down the street from their home that they walk to? Now I'm asking them to quit their job and to be destitute, to go to try to apply for government funding to be able to support themselves and feed their families. Um, what's so sad about this is we are the person who has to pay the ultimate price for leaving is the person leaving.
Yeah.
They have to leave everything.
Mhm.
They leave their friends, their family, what they know. And even if they went into safe house, they can't divulge where they are for
Oh.
safety purposes for them and their family and
Mhm.
other residents. So you're really asking someone to drop everything they know and move forward. And that's a very, very frightening thing to do. Even when we have people who do leave and we're like, okay, fill one bag, right? That's what you could take with you when you leave your home. Now, you've been in that home 35 years. What do you take your child's artwork? Do you take your clothes? Do you take your makeup, your jewelry? Do you take your tools? Like, what's important to your heart that you can't fit in that bag? And I'm asking you to leave it behind. I'm
Oh,
asking you to walk away from all of that so that you can be safe. That is such a huge ask. I can't even stress it enough. It's not justification for us sitting here to say, don't leave,
yes,
right?
yes,
We can't
yes.
rationalize that in our brains. It's like, no, safety first, right?
Mhm.
Um, if you were sinking in a body of water and you're holding on to your purse, let
Mhm.
go of your purse.
Right,
Your
right.
purse doesn't matter, right? That's kind of what we're asking them to do, but it's so stuff matters to people. Their stuff matters to them, and it's leaving their identity and leaving who they were to have this new life. And I do see it many, many times more thrust into it than chosen into it, right?
Yeah.
That once they get into that position where they're in the hospital, they're in a police station, they kind of realize that this has taken on a momentum of its own and they get pulled along. Um, and we have to be there to support them through that being pulled along because they are going to vacillate and they are going to not want to move forward without somebody saying, it's okay. I know you're scared. I hear you. I understand why you're scared, and let's talk about it and let's talk through it. And nothing is written in stone. Maybe leaving at that moment wasn't the right choice. And
Mhm.
who are we to say that for them?
Mhm.
It's not my job to say that for them, but I will tell you they'll come back if the person supporting them show them love and kindness. When they're ready, they'll come back and say, "Hey, I'm ready now."
I think there's also an element to this of you're right. Like, it sucks. It sucks that they're being put in this position where
Yeah.
they are the one that is experiencing abuse and their entire life has to change. Someone I know has gone through a similar situation to this, and it is almost incomprehensible of like, why on earth is she the one affected by this? And it's hard not to feel pissed off. And I think that all of those feelings make sense. And I think that they're
Mm.
valid. And I think you're right. It's something that also maybe we don't talk about enough, that it is hard to leave, that it sucks. It sucks that you have to be the one, and that maybe sometimes your partner gets to keep living mostly undisturbed at their job, with their friends, with their family, and your life has to change completely. Like, how could it not make you angry?
Right. And even take let's talk about someone who's not in living together. They're not living together, but I'm safety planning around them being independent. They were dating. It was an abusive dating relationship. But now I'm asking that person, that's the gym you went to every day. They
Yeah.
know you're going to be there. Can you go to a different gym? If that's the place you went for coffee on your way to work, can you go somewhere else for coffee? Can you take a different route to and from your job?
Yeah.
I'm asking so many things so
Mhm.
that that person can do their due diligence to be safe. But you know whose life is altered? Theirs.
Yeah.
Their life is no matter what is changing because as if they're being punished because
Mhm.
there's no other way to be safe
Yeah.
from that person.
And it does feel like a punishment. It does
Yeah.
feel like, you know what? This is happening to you, and now you're punished for it happening to you. And obviously, we don't want anyone to feel that way, but it is objectively your whole life changes, and that is hard. But as you said, there is help out there. There are things that can help people through these situations, provide support, and get them to safety. Something we didn't talk about was also the effect on people who have children and how maybe kids could also complicate it. Because I think there is sometimes a prevailing narrative that, oh, you stay together for the kids, you don't leave to support your kids. But why isn't it always inherently better to stay for the kids? Even if the kids might not want you to get divorced or might want their parents to stay together, why isn't it always better to stay together for the kids?
Well, you know what? There's so many thoughts, trains of thought about that topic. I think if it's a cultural component, right? If
Right.
culturally a married family, a religious reason, a married family is better than a divorced family.
Yep.
All of those factors play in individually with people. There is no cookie cutter answer to that question, though, for sure. I think for many victims, the fear of having to relinquish their children to go with this partner who's been abusive to them without their presence,
Hmm.
that fear overwhelms everything. And that's the way our system works, right? People, whether or not that person has been abusive to their partner, if there's no proof of abuse to the children, they are going to get those children on the weekends, or they're going to split custody. And then what that survivor was able to control while they stayed, now they're blind.
Yeah.
They can't see it. They can't control it. They can't be the go-between when that person's behavior starts to escalate. They're not there to buffer it for their children. So sometimes they feel, I'd rather be here, and because the thought of having my kids go with that person without me present is frightening and too much for me. Um, and that's a tough spot. That is a really tough spot. But is someone who's living in a home that is abusive and those children witness that, are they affected? Absolutely, they are.
Mhm.
They are affected. And that is a form of abuse to those children. Um, but what's the options here, right? The options are now letting visitation happen and you have no control over it,
Mhm.
or just bringing in other entities and speak your truth about why your children aren't safe in that environment, and advocate to be heard so people can step in and make sure that those children are safe in that environment. If there's drugs or alcohol, like there's agencies out there that will support you in supporting your children and making sure that they're safe. But again, that's another system, and it's another thing that someone has to fight through. I
Mhm.
mean, you're dealing with people who in the world have been taught they don't have a voice,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
In their relationship, they've never had a voice, but now they have to find their voice for their children and themselves
Mhm.
within all of these systems, right? Which is why it's so important to be connected to agencies that can help walk them through it, to
Mhm.
help them find their voice as
Mhm.
they're moving forward. But for children, that is just, you're either going to have two children come out of that. You're going to have those that don't ever want to be in that type of relationship,
Mhm.
or you're going to find children who see that the person who was abusive got their needs met,
Mhm.
and therefore will follow in the pattern of being a controller and being abusive because that's what got their needs met, right? And people want their needs met. That's the scenarios, and definitely children need to be able to connect to services and counseling to be able to process that. Their little brains are not developed. And for a parent, I see parents like this all the time. My child hates me. My
Mhm.
child thinks I'm doing the wrong thing. I'm being mean to daddy. I'm being mean to mommy, right? For their own safety. And sadly, that has to play out as they grow and as they mature and they're able to process what happened, and process it even as a child with counseling services, that is not the scenario they've made in their brain as is not the real one. And as they grow and they mature, you hope that they get a better, a more objective view of that relationship as they become adults,
Yeah.
to know that. But for a parent going through it in the moment, that's not a consolation. That is very, very, very hard to do. It is
No.
not easy.
And I think a lot of parents, to your point, try and absorb almost all of the abuse. So they're like, oh, I'm shielding them or I'm trying to protect them. But there's obviously moments when the kids are going to be alone with their mother or father or parent, guardian, where you can't control exactly what's going on. And I think that's also a very important element, too. And all of this, once again, isn't to say that it's hopeless you should stay in this relationship.
No, no,
Yes, and I think that's, like, the point that we really need to drive home too, is that there is help. You're just talking about connecting to agencies that can guide you through it, because it's like taking a really complicated exam and with an agency, you've studied for the exam instead of going in
Exactly.
blind. I think that is important to just really be clear about.
Mhm.
And
They're not alone, right?
yes.
There's a
Hmm.
huge piece of isolation around people who are in unhealthy relationships. And there's so many other people because we know this is an epidemic, right?
Yeah.
There are so many other people who are out there experiencing the same thing that
Hmm.
they are. And sometimes to be around those other people, or like to say they did group counseling, or just, to be around other people to validate the
Yeah.
experience they're having,
Hmm.
gives them momentum to plan, right? It's not a line in the sand sometimes.
Hmm.
There has to be some kind of mythology, like let's think it through.
Yeah.
Let's listen to other people, hear what works for them, hear what didn't work for them, and then figure out a plan for yourself based on your own situation. But that is about education, right? That's about taking that time to learn and to really figure out what's going to work best and keep you the safest, right? Because we know that moving out of that relationship is the most dangerous time for somebody,
Hmm.
right? And having that support and being able to plan around that it's vital. It is very, very, very important that they do that. And that's why connecting to services at any time during your journey, if you think this is unhealthy, talk to somebody, call
Hmm.
the local agency in your county, talk to somebody to really talk it out. Because if it feels wrong, it probably is wrong.
Yeah.
Right? We've trained ourselves to not tap into how we feel about things.
Mhm.
Um, but your body is designed to give you warnings. It
Yeah.
tells the back of your hair stands up, there's something going on, and to believe in yourself that if you feel that this is wrong, it probably is wrong, and to have somebody help you to talk about it and navigate through it and to plan around it.
Yeah. A brilliant point you brought up was that a lot of times people think what they're doing by encouraging someone to leave is you'll be safer. But are you always safer? As you mentioned, the first 18 months after somebody leaves a person that's using abuse are the most dangerous times for them. Can you
Yeah.
explain why or speak to that a little bit?
Well, you're taking away someone's power. That is the number one reason. So even with restraining orders, and we talk about this a lot, restraining orders will work two ways, right? They will either bring this into the light and you're bringing it into the legal system and that person is being exposed,
Mhm.
right? So they don't want to be seen in that light. So they will back off. They will be suddenly this perfect human being. Like that person's crazy. I never did that. And they will abide by that restraining order. Then
Mhm.
you have others who nobody's going to tell me what to do. No one's going to tell me I can't see my partner. No one's going to tell me I can't see my children. And they become more angry and more set on getting their control back.
Mhm.
And that's where the risk comes in, that they have now taken a step towards independence, and that person is not going to take kindly to that person being strong or wanting to leave them. That's where the risk comes in. But again, that doesn't mean they shouldn't leave. It means that they have to have a plan and they have to put a safety plan in place so that they stay as safe as possible.
Right. And I think you can find an example of one of our safety plans on jbws.org/resources. It's in
Absolutely.
Spanish as well. I do have a question just as we talk about this. How do you do this work day in and day out, knowing all of these complications and knowing how difficult it is? What is it that drives you to keep doing this work?
Well, I believe that anyone who does this work is a sower of seeds. That's what we're doing here. We are just trying to plant a seed of hope that life without abuse is possible.
Mm.
It may not feel like that in the moment, but if you plant the seed and you let them know that like I said before, you believe them, you validate them, you want to be here for them, um, that ability to plant the seed and let it grow on its own is what it's all about. And I always think, so even if I'm in a police station at 2 o'clock in the morning, I know that person is going to not take away every detail that I gave them that night. It's impossible. Their brains are not in a place to absorb it. They're in trauma, they're scared, there's so many things going on. But they will remember that I treated them with kindness, that I supported them in the moment, and that I will always come back, that I will always be there. And this agency will always be there to support them and not judge them and not be angry with them if they make a decision that we don't necessarily believe in or think is the right choice for them, because it's not my life. It is their life. And they have a right to self-determination too. I can just be hopeful that I planted that seed, that I held space with that person, that I was able to connect with them as a human being and know that I will always be present when they need me. Like there will always be someone to respond when you need them.
That is
That's just pushing
incredible.
through.
You're great. I mean, Robin, I think that's another thing. If you're in Morris County and you reach out and the crisis response team comes out and you're there, your presence is very soothing. And just knowing that and hearing that, I hope people can know that there's people like you on the other line that are kind and are validating and are accepting. And I think that that is, whether you want to accept a compliment or not, the best thing about you.
Thank you.
Before we wrap up this conversation, is there anything else that you'd like to add to this topic that we didn't get to or I didn't touch upon?
I just want people to walk away from this podcast and know that we understand, that we understand. And there's no judgment here. It's about holding space with them where they are right now, and with no expectations. And to always reach out for help. Just don't be afraid to reach out for help.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Unsilenced, Real Conversations About Abuse. This podcast is produced by JBWS, a domestic violence agency serving Morris County, New Jersey. Please let us know what topics you would like covered on this podcast by sending an email to podcast@jbws.org. Please note that this email address is only intended for content relating to the podcast. It is not meant to offer immediate assistance or access to services. If you live or work in Morris County and think you might be in an unhealthy relationship, JBWS is here to help. Please visit our website at jbws.org to learn more about our services, or call our 24-hour helpline to speak to members of our staff at 1-877-782-2873. If you recognize controlling or abusive behaviors in yourself, JBWS can also help change those behaviors. Through our Jersey Center for Nonviolence, JBWS offers programs for men, women, and adolescent males who have used abusive or controlling behaviors in their relationships. Please visit jbws.org/JCNV or call 973-539-7801 to learn more. If you don't live in Morris County, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Domestic violence grows in silence, so thank you so much for listening and helping us break through that silence through these types of conversations. Please follow us on social media and continue to share our content to get as many people talking about domestic abuse as possible.